Welcome to the referendum debate. The postal ballots are being sent out, decision day is approaching, and tonight we're in Edinburgh. On our panel here, we have the Finance Secretary John Swinney of the Scottish National Party, Scottish Labour leader Joanne Lamont, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats Charles Kennedy, and the Scotsman columnist Joyce McMillan. And in the interest of a good debate, our audience tonight are evenly divided between supporters of independence on one side of the hall, opponents on the other, plus some who are undecided in the middle. Our audience have submitted their questions and our panel have not seen them. Welcome to Leith Academy. Edinburgh, wrote Ian Rankin, is a city the size of a town with a village mentality. It might have a certain you'll-have-had-your-tea reputation, but this is also a place with its arms open to the world. The city's population doubles in August as the festival explodes into life, giving it an international reputation for the arts. Over the centuries, Edinburgh has also played a leading role in the flowering of philosophy, science and economics. There was more than one reason it was nicknamed the Athens of the North. Now, of course, it's home to Scotland's devolved Parliament, the first to sit here for 3 centuries. Home, too, to Britain's largest financial centre outside London. It was the Edinburgh Agreement which set this whole referendum in motion, and Edinburgh remains right at the heart of this debate. Well, let's get on with the debate now and take our first question this evening, which comes from Lauren McGovern.
I'd like to ask if the SNP are misleading the public about the NHS. John
Swinney.
No. The National Health Service in Scotland is a devolved responsibility. It is in operational control of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government, and we are able to take the National Health Service in a different direction to the National Health Service south of the border. But what we are not in control of is the total size of the budget of Scotland, because that is determined by the changes that are made to public expenditure in the United Kingdom. So, for example, if the UK budget and public services falls by £100, it will fall in Scotland by £10, and as a consequence, that spending squeeze will be felt in Scotland. So over the course of this spending review period, we'll wrestle with a 7.2% real terms reduction in our budget, so our resources for public services are falling, and that will inevitably put pressure on the health service. So we may in Scotland have a policy decision that we do not want to privatise the health service in Scotland, but the consequences of privatisation of the health service south of the border will be felt in the impact on the budget in Scotland, and that's why this is such an important issue to be secured and settled by a yes vote in the referendum.
Charles Kennedy.
Well, first of all, John is correct, and I think we all acknowledge, and it's a good thing, that the National Health Service, in terms of policy, is a wholly devolved matter. So how we run our health service is up to the people we elect, and that means that a different policy is being pursued in Scotland than it is south of the border, and that's fine. In terms of the funding, first point, since this government came into power on a UK basis, National Health Service expenditure has been ring-fenced. And secondly, if you were to constrain it, and that's a decision for a future general election, if you were to constrain it, you would only be constraining the rate of growth, because everybody knows, everybody accepts, that the rate of inflation within the health service is always higher, by definition, than it is within that of the economy as a whole. So when John points to the worry, and it's a worry, it isn't, as it's been portrayed by some, if you were to vote no in this referendum, you would be essentially an accomplice to finishing off the National Health Service in Scotland. Utter rubbish, an insult to the intelligence. But if you do want to put the share of growth or reduction which Scotland enjoys at the moment based on UK expenditure, there is an easy way to do that. That is to vote yes. It is to get independence, because then there is no Barnett formula from the day after we are independent, and this whole argument becomes redundant.
John Swinney, you're insulting people's intelligence.
No, because, you see, the problem with what... I know Charles is a Liberal Democrat, but, you know, if you look at what the Labour Party are saying in England and in Wales, they are making exactly the same point that I'm making, that there is a threat to the National Health Service because of the policy decisions that have been taken by the UK Government in privatising the health service south of the border, which has financial implications for the Scottish Government. It's been felt in Wales already, and they are up in arms about the direction of policy. So that's the real difficulty and danger that people are facing.
Thank you. Please contribute. Put your hands up. I'll come to you in a minute if anyone wants to contribute. But first, Joanne Lamont. I mean, John Swinney there raises your party's position south of the border. The Shadow Health Secretary, Andy Burnham, has said NHS privatisation is being forced through at a pace and scale. 5 more years of the same would push the NHS off the cliff edge. Why isn't that a threat to Scotland?
Which is why a Labour government will ensure there won't be privatisation of the health service in England. And indeed, all of the figures show that in Wales, Northern Ireland, England, as in Scotland, people believe the National Health Service is a precious thing. And it is dishonest of the SNP to say all of a sudden this is so important. Not mentioned in the White Paper, not mentioned in the Constitution when they unveiled it, not mentioned in the first debate 3 weeks ago by Alex Salmond. This is desperate stuff, because the health service cannot be privatised in Scotland. It is not under threat of privatisation, but it is central that we make sure it is properly funded. That is not about the Constitution, that then is about politics and the choice we make. And because we created the Scottish Parliament with complete control over the health service, regardless of what happens in the rest of the United Kingdom, we can protect the health service. But I'll make this final point. The real threat to the health service, if you listen to what many, many people who care deeply about the health service are saying, how do you deliver a health service that we can be proud of with a £6 billion gap in funding that will be caused day one of independence?
Thank you. We'll take a point from the audience. The blonde woman in the middle, yes.
Joanne, I just wanted to ask if the Yes campaign are lying. Are Unison also lying? Are the thousands of people marching from Jarrow also lying? Are the charities...
They are not saying that the Scottish Health Service will be privatised. They are concerned about the direction of travel, English and the rest of the United Kingdom. But the fact of the matter is, the people in the rest of the United Kingdom, like Scotland, want a publicly funded health service. That's what it shows. And if the Tories go to the next election saying they're going to privatise the health service, I'll guarantee you one thing: that will make sure there'll be a Labour government next May. That's a fact.
The point that cannot be avoided here is the implication. What the people who are marching from Jarrow are all highlighting is the danger of the direction of travel in England, and as a consequence of that, that will flow through into the funding arrangements of the Scottish Parliament, as sure as night follows day. And we have to stop that happening if we are to be successful.
I want to go to Joyce McMillan, who hasn't spoken.
Well, I think there's a deeper issue behind this question of what's happening to the NHS in England. I think it's an issue of trust and democracy. You may recall the 2010 general election, when both of the parties that are now in government at Westminster had in their manifestos that they would not conduct any more top-down reforms of the NHS. And yet within 18 months they had enacted a reform which every, I think, independent commentator agrees could lead to the break-up and to the emergence of a largely privatised NHS. Now, why did that happen? And I think if you think about why that happens, then you begin to get close to some of the issues of trust, of excessive lobbying, of influence peddling, and of politicians not sticking to the policies that they put to the electorate because of pressures from wealthy and influential people, which are among the reasons why people have ceased to trust Westminster government in the way that they used to. And I think...
We'll take a point from the woman in blue in the middle, yes.
Is it not the case that the NHS has now come to the fore in the Yes campaign because of all the problems they were having with the currency issues?
Okay, thank you. We'll come to the woman in the front row.
I think you have to look at what's happening. Already we're being told by Andy Burnham, he's your health secretary, saying that it's only a matter of time before ordinary people are going to have to start paying a monthly tariff to see their GP. That is privatisation by the back door if it ever was.
The Labour Party doesn't have to defend what has been done to the health service just now. We're going to stop what has been done to the health service just now. You can vote for that in 2015. But I would have to say this. The Scottish Health Service were described by the leader of the Scottish doctors as a 5-year car crash. We have got waiting times, they're not targets, and they're not being met. There are concerns about the pressures in the health service right now. And the proposal being put forward by the SNP is to take £6 billion out of our funding. We're going to have a worse position for our health service than it was before. And it's profoundly misleading, all of a sudden, at this late stage, to be scaremongering round the question of privatisation. Indeed, I think I heard the First Minister yesterday acknowledging that it wasn't under threat of privatisation.
Okay.
It's profoundly unfair to scaremongering amongst people who rely on the health service in the way that they do.
I'll take a couple of points. I'll allow you to come back on that, but we'll go to the floor first. Yes.
My lovely wife's a senior charge nurse in the NHS. She runs 6 wards. She's not concerned about what might happen in England at some point in the future. She's concerned about understaffing in her ward, she's concerned about bed blocking, she's concerned about over-occupancy rates, and she's concerned about our £12.1 billion deficit, which is higher than the rest of the UK, and what impact that's going to have on health, welfare and education in this country. Okay. That is what's at risk.
Thank you. Here, yes.
I'd just like to point out for a start that the unions are actually saying that Scotland's NHS is under threat. Another thing is, when you're saying that there's understaffing, we've already seen the problems that a squeeze in the Barnett formula causes in the police force, where we've had to combine all police forces into one to go past how much the budget has been cut. This will happen in the NHS, and we'll need to cut corners elsewhere.
Charles Kennedy, you opposed that particular policy, didn't you, as a Liberal Democrat?
Very much so. I mean, look, the policy decision, you can't, the SNP government can't have it both ways. They can't say we control the policy in the NHS, we're just worried about the money. The policy of the police in Scotland was to have a national, centralised police force. Mrs Thatcher wouldn't have dared do that.
Let's
Alex
keep it
Salmon
to the health
did,
service if we
and
can.
that is not a valid comparison at all.
Okay, thank
not
you.
At all.
I'd like to go back to Lauren McGovern, who asked the question originally. Are the SNP trying to mislead the public over the NHS? You work in the NHS, Lauren, is that right?
Yeah, I do. I work for the out-of-hours service at one of the local hospitals. And what concerned me was, in 2011, the SNP manifesto said that they had, the Scottish Government had sole responsibility for the running of the NHS and the budget. And then, it just feels like the past few weeks that's kind of been put to the side, and oh my goodness, we have no control over it whatsoever.
Yeah, at least one person does.
Well, if you look at the data that came out today, to address the point the gentleman raised a moment ago about his wife's concerns, there's a record number of nurses in the health service today.
It's reality. It's what's not in our NHS today. You can talk about funding, but your government chose to spend £2.4 billion on cutting the council tax, or freezing the council tax, sorry. That money could have been spent in the NHS. You could raise tax, you choose not to do it. I'll ask you right now, if we were independent, how much extra money would you spend on NHS, welfare and education? Because we keep on hearing all these things are going to improve, but you plan to fund that by cutting tax, which is just absolutely unbelievable. £12.1 billion deficit, one of the highest in the Western world. How are you going to deal with that without cutting services to the most vulnerable people in society?
Okay,
If you look at the data in government, if you look at the data in government expenditure and revenue in Scotland over the last 5 years, Scotland was in a stronger financial position than the rest of the UK, to the tune of £8.3 billion. Now, what I want to do is make that wealth work for the people of Scotland, so we can tackle the inequality that is driving the health problems and the demography problems that we have in Scotland.
Hang on, wait, both of you, just one moment. Hang on, sir. Thank you. Just a second. The question is that the gentleman's asking, how much extra are you going to spend on all of these things? His position is that he doesn't think an independent Scotland could afford to do this. Well, what is your answer?
Well, what I'm saying is that Scotland is in a stronger financial position, to the tune of £8.3 billion over the last 5 years compared to the rest of the United Kingdom. What that would enable Scotland to do is to invest more in our public services. The plans of... Well, wait a second. The UK Government plans over the next few years to increase public expenditure by 1%. I intend, on the plans that I've published, to increase it by 3%. That would enable us to invest more in our health service, more in our public services, and continue to reduce continue to reduce the deficit. Because what it enables us to do is to boost the public finances of Scotland by getting more folk into employment and investing in the fabric of our country. Now, what that's about? That's about turning our back on austerity and starting to invest in the prosperity of our country. That's the choice that we've got in front of us.
That, of course, is the public Mr Swinney. But the private Mr Swinney, to his cabinet colleagues, said that there would be less money to spend, even to meet current expenditure, and there would be pressures that would have to be managed. In his own document, he recognises the financial pressures and there would be a bigger deficit in Scotland than elsewhere, and that this would mean even the services we're delivering now would be hard to deliver. And we know, you only have to look at the newspapers, listen to what people are saying about what's happening in A&E, the pressures that are on care, the pressures that nurses are describing, doctors and others. The idea that you can promise everybody the earth and somehow at the same time cut taxes simply doesn't add up in terms of arithmetic, never mind logic. And I think people deserve a better answer than simply saying it will be better, there is more money.
Let's take a point.
£6 billion to the town.
Yeah, the man here. Yes, sir.
Well, given that Scotland's actual finances for the NHS come from the block grant that's decided at Westminster, and over time, as we run out of money for the resources that the NHS needs, are we not heading towards the American system, where the free NHS is so terrible that people, even the poorest people, are forced to scrimp and save for private healthcare?
Joyce, that's why people right across the United Kingdom want to keep it in public hands. But we have to be honest about how it's funded, rather than pretending that everything's fantastic just now. We're in control of the services now. Yes, it's under pressure, and we need to acknowledge that and work on how you're actually going to fund it, rather than pretending by changing the Constitution these problems disappear.
Joyce
That's simply
McMillan.
not true.
The underlying question in this referendum is not what John Swinney is going to do over the next 3 years. The underlying question is whether people want to be making these decisions about tax and spending in Edinburgh or in London. Now,
Charles Kennedy, let's put that point to question.
No, but 3 or 4 years ago, I would have answered the question by saying, look, people are people, doesn't matter if you make them in London or Edinburgh, the pressures are the same, and there's a lot of truth in that. But now, having looked at what's happened in London, not only on health policy, but on several other areas of policy, I feel that turning round that Westminster Parliament to anything like a proper kind of social democratic consensus is an almost impossible task, and I think it will be easier to get our priorities right if we make those decisions in Edinburgh.
Charles
and I
Kennedy.
say that not because I'm a nationalist, but because I'm a social democrat.
Charles Kennedy, why on earth wouldn't you want people in Scotland to take decisions that affect the people of Scotland?
But we do. I mean, those of us of an age who fought the devolution campaign against Tory governments, and indeed the likes of Joyce and myself were happy to be in the same platform in those halcyon days, that was exactly what the argument was. Now, the argument is moving forward, and in fact, it's moved forward further, I'm glad to say, as a result of this referendum campaign. I'm not actually too critical of either side when they develop their positions as the campaign goes on. That's actually democracy, folks, in action. That is something to celebrate. And one of the areas, whether you look at the health service, which we're talking about at the moment, many of the other areas that are coming up, inevitably, what we're moving towards, bit by bit, is a more decentralised federal United Kingdom. We're already made big moves in Cardiff, in Edinburgh, in Belfast, in Greater London with the elected mayor in the London Assembly, and it's going to have to start happening in the regions of England as well. Part of the impetus that lies behind that march in Jarrow as we speak, and the voices that are being raised in Yorkshire. Now, we're more likely to get that, and we're more likely to meet Joyce's very fair point and anxiety that she expresses if Scotland is in there, absolutely in the vanguard of that move towards a more sane federal United Kingdom which respects and reflects its constituent parts, than if we just take our bat and ball away and leave the rest of it to their own devices.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's got to be the challenge.
Let's move on. Let's move on to some of the other questions that Charles Kennedy was referring to there. As we do so, let me remind you, you can join tonight's debate on Twitter. The BBC IndieRef is the hashtag. You can text us on 80295, or you can email referendumdebate@bbc.co.uk, and you can go to the BBC Scotland News website to see a selection of comments. Let's take the next question from Anne Meikle.
A recent study has shown 1 million Scots are now living in poverty, with 100,000 more expected by 2020. What would a yes or a no vote do to address this issue?
Joanne Lamont.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. One of the things that struck me as the debate has developed, people will know I was rather cynical about the whole referendum question. What I'm struck by is the people on either side who made the decision a long time ago. Perhaps a nationalist who believes that identity politics really matter, or people who are really strongly thorough to the British state. But in the middle, there are people who are testing the arguments on the basis of actually what can we do? How do we create a fairer society? How do we make sure we address the problems of poverty and disadvantage? And all of my political life, I've been committed to acting on these questions. And I look at this question, but whether it's more likely or less likely you can make progress in these policies in an independent Scotland or across the United Kingdom. And I think that once we've passed the decision, whatever that decision might be, we do need to find a way of coming together to talk about actually how do you really make a difference. I would contend when Labour was in power, we did a lot of work around investing in working families, supporting lone parents, making sure that our public services responded properly to people, but we clearly need to do more. We lifted a lot of children out of poverty, a lot of pensioners out of poverty, by bringing together our politics and action. And I want to see us going back to that post this referendum.
At the end of the day, if you've spent your whole political life devoted to this, and there are still 1 million Scots classed as being in poverty, hasn't your whole political life been a failure?
Say the same thing to the charities who give voice to women, children and poverty groups all over the place. No, you don't give up. And yes, we made progress. We're not in the same place as I was as a wee girl in the 60s. There are huge differences. The opportunities women have, the opportunities children have, are far, far different from the wee girl I was in its inner city Glasgow. But you've got a long way to go. And my concern is in the last period, we have gone back the way because Scotland has been on pause while we should have been wrestling with these questions. Well, we should have been looking at that.
Let's move that on. So, the question, Joyce McMillan, was how would a no or a yes vote address the problem of poverty?
It's a very intractable problem, and I don't think there's any political party in Scotland has really a great deal to be proud of in terms of their impact on that very stubborn million who are in poverty in Scotland. Labour did indeed, and that's a fair comment, do a little to lift families and children out of poverty. But the trouble with the last Labour government was that it was doing these things which were good enough in themselves, while at the same time continuing to subscribe to the kind of general neoliberal ideology about how a society should work, which inevitably pushes down wages, takes away people's security and enhances poverty. Now, unless you are brave enough to make some kind of ideological attack on that, on the idea that you have to be a low-wage, rubbish work economy in order to make your way in the modern world, then you're not really going to get very far in tackling poverty. People need good jobs, they need secure jobs, and we need to stop running our labour market to suit the needs of bad employers. And I'm afraid that includes subsidising bad employers by paying people huge amounts of in-work benefits, which was one of the main innovations of the last Labour government. So we need, I'm afraid, Joanne, a much more radical approach to this, and that goes for all the political parties, Labour, the SNP and the Lib Dems.
OK, let's take what is actually our first point from an undecided member of the audience. You have not had your hands up very much. You have to put your hands up, undecideds. Yes.
I work for a disabled people's organisation, and we see firsthand how the current cuts in our welfare system are disproportionately disadvantaging disabled people. And I want to know if either side in this debate can guarantee a better benefit system for disabled people.
Charles Kennedy, your party is partly responsible for this.
Yeah, and we're in government, and I'm not an uncritical member of Better Together, and I'm certainly not an uncritical member of the Liberal Democrats, as your voting record and speaking record on the floor of the House of Commons makes clear over the last 4 years.
So what's your point in relation to independence?
My point, coming right back to I hope we can meet that. And in answering the lady who raised the initial question, I'll tell you why. I think if you look at the whole of history, poverty, social poverty, has been best addressed when the politicians actually get beyond what all too often is our poverty of ambition. And one of my political heroes is Franklin D. Roosevelt. And in the midst, read John Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath, in the midst of the most appalling depression in the middle of the 20th century in the United States, he came forward with a New Deal. And he shook the timbers of the establishment right across that continent, and he transformed it in a way that he built a consensus that lasted for another 40 or 50 years. Now, that's what we need to do in the United Kingdom as well. And one of the things that struck me, both as a participant, but equally actually as an observer of programmes like this over the course of the past few weeks in particular, is there is no poverty of ambition in Scottish, and I would also say UK politics. And what we need to do, if it's a no vote, but equally I suppose if it's a yes vote, on September the 19th onwards, is to use the clear political ambition that's there right across the spectrum, with fresh thinking, new ideas and a greater sense of impetus than we've had before. We can do it in Scotland, I think we can do it in a reforming United Kingdom, and we can do something about poverty in an imaginative way that has not been seen post-war in this country. That has to be the ambition, and that has to be the challenge that we're putting in front of ourselves as Scots.
Let's take the audience very keen to come in. With your hand very, very high up in the air and the earrings, yes.
I've been working for the past couple of months with Trussell Trust Food Bank. And it's an extremely eye-opening and really disheartening job to be working in. I've had people come to me and saying they've not eaten for the past 2 days. That's actually the type of situation we're in within this union, to make that very clear.
And independence would solve that, would it?
Well, the question that I'm going to put is, most of the people...
Let's hear her answer. Let's hear her answer. I'd like to hear the woman's answer. Yes.
In this debate, there has been a lot of angry men shouting, but I'd like to have a civil one. So... basically, the main reason they're coming to me is for benefit sanctions, which, I'm sorry, the Labour Party have not stood strongly against. But let's get away from party politics. Okay. The question of independence is not for the SNP, and we have to stop misconstruing this. The question of independence is saying we now have the opportunity in 2014 to take a new Scotland, to put the power in people's hands and start asking what we want from society. That is what independence gives us.
Thank you very much. But isn't the inherent problem here, John Swinney, isn't the problem always going to come back to the same thing, which is, where is all this money going to come from? It must be difficult and expensive to solve poverty. If it has not been achieved in the United Kingdom, why should it be different? Why would it be different in an independent Scotland?
Well, why it would be different is because we would have all of the tools at our disposal to live up to the values that have just been set out by the young woman there. To actually the tools of integrating a tax and benefit system so that we incentivise people to go into employment, to have the ability to establish linked-up employment programmes that would work with our charities. The young lady at the back there that talked about the people with disabilities. I've seen many good examples We're funding them already, sir. We're funding the projects already, and I've seen very good examples. The problem with the projects that we've got just now. The problem that we've got with the projects just now is that all the good work that we're doing is being undone by the welfare cuts made by the United Kingdom government that's forcing more and more people into the self-same food banks that we've just heard about a moment ago. That's the root of the problem, and we know what the poverty problem is in Scotland today. We've known about it for years. We've known about it throughout all the Labour governments that tried to tackle these issues. We're now seeing a situation where the number of people in poverty, having been falling for a number of years, is now going up. Why? Because of UK government reforms, we've got to take better decisions here in Scotland according to our values and our aspirations. That's what we should do.
Yes.
Mr Swinney, if you really wanted to take better decisions to better your view on poverty, why did you freeze the council tax for everyone across the income spectrum? I could have paid more. I didn't need a council tax freeze. That could have been used to help local councils, to help people that are in poverty. But you chose not to do that. Those are powers you have today.
That policy hit the poor, didn't it?
No, it didn't. The council tax freeze had a disproportionately bigger impact, proportionately on the incomes of those who are poorer within our society. That's the data.
Okay,
that is the data. That is the data on the council tax freeze. And what we did was we took the heat off a lot of hard-pressed working families who were being absolutely hammered by sky-high increases in the council tax. That's exactly why we've frozen the council tax.
There were a lot of people who benefited from a council tax freeze, but suggest the poorest people who'd been council tax benefited most is simply a nonsense. But I would also say this: there are lots of things the Scottish Government can do. One of the big things you can do to get people out of poverty is to get them ready for work. Importantly, critical role for colleges sector in particular, for people who are living in poverty, who don't do particularly well at school. I taught many of them, and then they get a second chance at college. So why, of all places, has disproportionately cuts come in the college sector, 140,000 places fewer, women in particular suffering, and as a consequence, women who need part-time education to get themselves the skills to work are disproportionately affected. These are the very mums who can make a difference to their families if they were supported. There is not one policy the Scottish Government has promoted, no matter how good they are, that redistributes wealth from the rich to the poor. That is a reality.
Okay, right up the back in blue, yes.
I've got two quick points. My understanding of the Scotland Act from 1998, which set up the Scottish Parliament as a devolved power, could, at a stroke, be cut out by Westminster at any time of its choosing. So the whole of the Scottish Parliament could be completely dissolved. That's the first point. But
is the other point on poverty?
The second point is very telling that throughout this whole debate in Scotland, there's not been one single Conservative person come to speak at an event, because let's be realistic. With all due respect, Charles, I admire you greatly. Joanne, thank you for all your contributions, but you will not have a cat's chance in hell of forming the next UK government, and therefore you will have no power.
Okay,
you can promise us nothing.
Thank you very much. I mean, just in fairness, the last time John Swinney was on this programme, he was sitting alongside Ruth Davidson. But anyway, let's go down to the front.
What I'd like to raise is, OK, you froze the council tax, but it affected people on low incomes. It did not benefit them. Then education, you merged, example, free education became no education. Why did it become no education? Because the colleges merged. You cut the spaces. Students no longer that had a space, lost their space. Not only that, you cut the well, I could keep going on about courses.
Okay, well, we have the point, though. We have the point.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Joyce McMillan.
Well, I mean, I agree with a lot of the criticisms that are being made of SNP policy. I don't approve of the council tax freeze. I think councils should have more power to vary their own tax. And I think we need a radical reform of local government in Scotland. I agree with the great Leslie Riddle that we need... that we need much more local government in Scotland, and I think that, you know, as far as the colleges policy and so on is concerned, I don't agree with what the SNP do. But those are not arguments against independence. They're arguments against the policy of the current SNP government.
Thank you.
So,
very briefly.
In a sense, I feel as if we're slightly drifting off the point, in the sense that, of course, you can disagree with things that the present SNP government has done, but unless you believe that Scotland is such a naturally impoverished place that we would have absolutely no room for manoeuvre in setting policies at all, and I don't believe that, then the fact is, if we have an independent Scotland, you can vote for someone else.
Okay,
it's not going to be a one-party state.
In one sentence, if you could.
The logic of that position is that you can disagree with Tory policies and still want to be part of the United Kingdom. That's what we're saying. We will get a Labour government next year, all the figures are showing so. Why would we want not to deal with the policies of a Tory government inside the security of the United Kingdom?
But Joanne, will it be
the same argument?
But Joanne, will it be a centre-left Labour government, or will it be a centre-right Labour government like the last one?
Of course
That's
it will.
the question.
If you listen to the Labour Party, they're talking about 0 hours contracts. I met women yesterday talking about the everybody's grace of how they would end zero-hours contracts. We argued for living wage for people who were benefiting from public spending in Scotland, and it was the SNP who voted it down. That is something that we would do at a UK level. It's about political choice, not about the Constitution, and we need to get back to that argument.
Really, honestly, I'd really like to move on, so if you'd be very brief, please.
With all due respect to Joyce in particular, I can't help, and it also leads with the question that was made at the back, the point that was made at the back a moment ago. You can't have it both ways. You can't say this is all about the rebirth, the re-establishment of democracy, and then at the wave of a hand write off 3 political parties as having no choice and no relevance, and Joyce slightly saying, and oh, it depends, even if we got a Labour government on the UK basis, would it be centre-left or centre-right? Well, hang on a minute. If you're making a great democratic choice, you've got to accept the outcome of that choice in due course, not just, I'm making this choice providing I then get precisely what I want ideologically. That is not a logical position.
That does not
it is
come
not
well.
a logical position.
Charles, that really does not come well from the Liberal Democrats, which gathered a lot of votes at the last general election in the UK, as you know, by positioning itself to the left of the Labour Party on a lot of issues, including student grants, and then absolutely breaking its word. NHS, student grants, you know, if you're going to stand on left-wing policies and then move to the right as soon as you get elected, who can trust you?
Joyce,
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm very short. As Joyce well knows, because she's even been complimentary to me about in days gone by, I stand on exactly the same values and principles I've always stood on, and on the policies that I was proud to lead the Liberal Democrats into at 2 successive UK general elections. I haven't changed.
We're going to take the next question, which comes from Dorothy Duncan.
In last night's debate in Glasgow, do the panel think that Mr Salmond was able to allay concerns to the electorate regarding the currency issue?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. In last night's debate in Glasgow, did the panel think Mr Salmond was able to allay the concerns about currency? Charles Kennedy.
I don't think he allayed the concerns of those who have great doubts and question marks about it. In fact, and this rather surprised me as a matter of fact, he rhetorically went on the front foot. And I try and be a fair judge of this one. I would say as a debating performance last night, Alex Salmond clearly won in the way that Alistair Darling won a couple of weeks earlier. But I don't actually think these debates, to be honest, I wasn't cock-a-hoop when I think Alistair was recorded the winner, and I'm not crestfallen that Alec was recorded winner last night, because I think it's much more complicated than that. It's not a presidential election, this is a much bigger debate, as we've got reflected here. In terms of the currency, the things that surprised me, in going on the front foot, he actually said, I've got 3 plan Bs. Now, this could be a clever tactic. No, this could be a clever tactic in the sense of kick as much dust in your opponent's eyes as you can. That could work for him. I don't think it will. But he also said, I want a mandate. Now, this was a development of the argument we haven't heard before, and it's a very interesting development in this campaign. I want you, ladies and gentlemen, he said, to give me a mandate to go and negotiate the best outcome, the best option for Scotland. Now, just think about the language for a moment, if you please. If I say to you, give me a mandate and I'll go and get the best deal I can, the implication is, and then I'll come back and tell you what it is, and you'll say we're for it or against it. He doesn't remind you. He'll go away. He may try and get a deal. He may or may not get a deal. Let's say he does get a deal. Let's concede as much of this to Alec as possible. He sure as anything will come back and say it's the best deal that was available, but he won't then ask you in a second referendum, is that what you want? And that's the implication of the mandate argument, and it is a complete ruse on people, and it will be, I think, his downfall.
Okay. Yeah.
Taking a gamble. Can we afford to take a gamble? Where will we go? Where will we bank our currency? What will happen if the large businesses leave?
OK, John Swinney.
What the First Minister did last night was he set out exactly the clear proposition.
Give him a break. Give him a break.
he set out exactly the proposition the Scottish Government is putting forward, which is to argue for a currency union between an independent Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom, which is in the interests of both an independent Scotland and the rest of the UK. And what he also did was made very clear that we've done all the groundwork to set out what are the different options that would be there for an independent Scotland if it chose to do so. But our priority, our preference, our argument, our best argument to put forward, the one that our independent experts believed to be in the interests of an independent Scotland, was to keep the pound as part of a currency union. And I thought the First Minister got that point across very clearly, very powerfully, and in a very emphatic way to the audience last night.
Yes, the man in Batman, in fact.
When I leave here today, I'm going to go home on a bus. I don't have a plan B, just in case there's no bus. But I might get a taxi, I might get a train, I might do a million different things, but I'll eventually get home. Realistically, I'm going to get a bus. We're going to use the pound. There's no one can stop us from using the pound, so it's going to be the pound. Can we talk about something else for a bit that other people care about?
I'm sorry to say we're going to talk about it for a little bit longer, but Joanne Lamont.
Yeah. I mean, reflecting on last night's debate, I think if shouting won the debate, then Alex Salmond won it, and I have to say, as someone who infamously...
People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
Who infamously shouted, I was going to make that point. I thought it rather took the bad look off Nicola Sturgeon and myself in that regard, so I was quite happy. But I would say this, the idea that you can flippantly say, oh, it's like buses, the 3 buses come along, when you're talking about something as serious as the currency was gravely concerning to me.
But,
now,
but isn't the man's point that you'll get to the destination, that Scotland will have a currency if it becomes independent?
You see,
isn't
the
that the
First
point?
Minister could argue that he would have the sovereign, he would be able to express the sovereign right of the people of Scotland. Curiously, very significant parts of the Yes campaign don't agree with the First Minister on the currency question. So it's the issue of mandate in its first of all. But whatever that is, whatever that mandate is, he has not got the ability to mandate the rest of the United Kingdom of their position. Now, let's be clear. What we're asking is the Bank of England to stand behind our banks. The Bank of England is there, supported by the UK Government, which can only do that because it's supported by taxpayers right across the United Kingdom. So let's think, something happens to a bank in Scotland, the taxpayers of the rest of the United Kingdom have to step in to protect our banks, despite the fact that we are not contributing to that. That makes no sense for the rest of the United Kingdom, and I can't imagine why we would want to put ourselves in that position either. It makes no sense. Once we are separate countries, we sadly owe each other nothing. And we deserve better from a First Minister who is making the case for Scotland to do something as dramatic as leaving the United Kingdom, to explain in simple terms what he was going to do. And what he's proposing now is sterlingisation, which the Professor Ronald MacDonald has said would mean a deficit of £12.6 billion, not £6 billion. That is very risky.
I'd like to ask the woman, and the undecideds in the middle, yes, with the glasses. Yeah.
I just wanted to address this currency debate. By discipline, I'm an economist, and I have invested in different currencies around the world.
Thank goodness you're here.
No, but seriously, I get so irritated by this. I think this is a political football, and I actually think Alex Salmond's response last night was an adequate response. And the thing that concerns me, though, is if we vote yes on September the 18th, I am not convinced that all the negotiations can happen in the 18-month timetable. And I even want to table, maybe this is 10 years of negotiation, and does it really matter?
Thank you. Joyce McMillan, yes, please.
I think that's right. I think the 18 months is indeed extremely optimistic. I mean, you could declare an Independence Day, but you can bet your bottom dollar there, or indeed we might be using dollar. You can bet your bottom dollar that there would be another decade of negotiations. It would be a very, very complicated situation. But the fact is that if there is a yes vote, then the whole structure of power in the UK will change overnight. And if there's one thing I've learned about dealing with Westminster over the years as a civic campaigner, it's that you have to play hardball. You have to have power in order to bring them to the negotiating table. And when the Scottish people vote yes, if they vote yes, then the whole balance of power will change. And the civil servants in Whitehall and everyone else in the structure of British government will have to start thinking, what is the best outcome that we can now get from this new situation? And that will change, their thinking. No, that will change their thinking about everything. There will be a long and complicated negotiation on issues like Trident and on how long it's going to take to decommission Trident and on what you do about the warheads. There will be issues about how the whole of the sort of energy industry in Scotland is handled. There will be issues about how the assets of the United Kingdom are divided up. Scotland will go into that negotiation with plenty of cards in its hand, and you can bet your bottom dollar an agreement will be reached. Right. As Alex Salmond said last night, there is no country in the world that doesn't have a working currency.
I would like the woman in the floral top. Yes.
I've just been thinking, if Scotland does become independent, this is all. It's not about the pound, because if we applied to rejoin the EU, we would be forced to accept the euro. Yeah.
John Swinney.
Can I make three brief points? And the lady's point... they'll be very brief. The lady's point in floor top, if you want to join the euro, it starts with a voluntary act of joining the exchange rate mechanism, and an independent Scotland wouldn't do so. The lady asked about the timescale for transition, for negotiation. The UK government's legal advisor, who advised them on issues in relation to transition, said that our 18-month timescale was about accurate, were his words, Professor James Crawford. And the final point is that one of the revelations about the currency last night was one of the points that Alistair Darling ironically made. In one of his responses to Alex Salmond, he said, of course you can use the pound. Well, I've got a leaflet here from Joanne Lamont, which says, in response to a question, what will the currency be in independent Scotland? And Joanne says, it won't be the pound. So she's flatly contradicted by what Alistair Darling said in the debate last night. It will be the pound.
Joanne Lamont.
Because, like your fiscal commission, I couldn't possibly conceive that anybody who was serious about protecting public service in Scotland would want to have sterlingisation, which is not to have a central bank, so the financial services would have to go, not to be able to rely on your funding properly.
But is Alistair Darling right when he says Scotland could use the pound?
Scotland could use the pound, but
well, so your leaflet's wrong. So your leaflet's totally wrong. So that's it. Joanne's leaflet, this leaflet that's going round the houses, I'm voting no. Like all the rest of it, is absolute rubbish. We've heard it from Joanne Lamont tonight.
This is not a game.
No, this is total rubbish. We've just heard it tonight. It's total rubbish.
Hang on a sec.
Commission ruled out sterlingisation because of the unbelievable damage it would do to the people of Scotland. So we would not want to advocate using a pound like Panama uses the dollar.
Joyce McMillan.
One thing that puzzles me about this debate is the lack of attention that is paid to the many, many precedents of countries becoming independent from the UK, including Ireland, which for, 70 years after it became independent, used something which was effectively the pound, which they called the punt, and which was pegged to the pound. Now, there were issues with that, but actually Treasury officials were very helpful to the Irish government in setting that up. I mean, I really cannot think why people think that it's going to be more difficult for us to negotiate some kind of arrangement to use the pound if we think that's the best solution for us, after a perfectly peaceful referendum when, Ireland, the nascent Irish Republic, was able to do that after, a bitter civil war.
And Ireland did progress once we were into the euro.
Charles Kennedy.
Ireland did progress. Ireland did progress once it went into the euro, and, there may come a time when Scotland wants to go into the euro, but that's not the situation.
Do you think Scotland should go into the euro?
No, I don't think that's a legitimate option. Ironically, quite a number of years ago, Alex Salmond and I would have been on the same side of a debate calling for a referendum on the principle if the UK was ready for entry, to get a yes vote so that Parliament at that point could have decided to enter the euro, had the conditions been right. Time has moved on, and we both are now not of the view that the euro is a good option for us. But let's just get this point about this rhetoric in last night's debate. And I don't want to disappoint our friends over here on the yes side. Alex seized in it, John's just seized in it. It's a good rhetorical debating point. If Alistair, and it's up to him, he didn't correct it later on, if Alistair had completed the sentence, look at the debate, ladies and gentlemen. He was in the middle of saying Scotland could use the pound, and he went on to say, or the ruble, and he would have, and so on and so on. You can call it what you like. So let's just call it the pound. But it's a pound which isn't backed by a central bank. So there's a run on the pound. Unlike today, you're stuffed. It's a pound in which you don't have the reserves, and it's a pound, remember, which, if you were using it in that independent fashion, not the UK sterling that we have at the moment, Alex Salmond made clear, if they don't give us that, his idea of negotiation, we wouldn't settle or shoulder our bit of the debt.
Well, I want to put
and if
that...
you didn't do that,
yeah,
on day one of an independent Scotland, never mind London and the terrible people down there, the international markets would have you for breakfast, lunch and dinner.
I want to put that to John Swinney. John Swinney, Alex Salmond said in last night's debate, if you deny us the financial assets, then the UK will get stuck with all of the liabilities. Is that now your firm position? You would definitely walk away, call it what you will, from the debt if there was no currency union. Is that your definite, firm position now?
Alex Salmond said last night in the debate that our preferred option was a currency union.
We all know that.
Well, wait a second. No, but it's important. It's important that it's important.
Everybody knows
It's important that I fully answer your question, which is that we support a currency union in which we would take our fair share of the debt that's been built up over time. But if the UK is going to seize the assets, then it's welcome to all the liabilities, and we won't be having any of them if that's how the UK behave.
We are rapidly running out of time, so let's take another question from Helen Kivlin. Helen Kivlin, I'm sorry for people who wanted to come in, but the time is running away with us. Next question, please.
The amount of oil to be obtained in the future has been reported with conflicting views. Who is telling the truth?
OK, Syrian Wood, who is an expert in the field, a businessman of some note, says that it's likely that between 15 and 16.5 billion barrels remain. Others say up to 24 billion barrels of oil equivalent. Joyce McMillan.
I don't know who's telling the truth, and what's more, I don't think anyone else does. As Joe Strummer once memorably said, the future is unwritten. Oil is a volatile resource, and an independent Scotland would be well advised not to be too dependent on it, and I'm sure John Swinney is as well aware of that fact as anyone. And in any case, if we want to have a genuinely sustainable future, then we should be thinking about leaving some of that oil in the ground and not exploiting it at all. However, the idea that Scotland having this oil wealth, which we have, is somehow a bad thing because it inflicts volatility on our economy, seems to me to be fairly ridiculous. I mean, there are many, many countries in the world, Norway being the most obvious and nearest example, which have managed to found a very strong national economy by using their oil wealth wisely. And I do not think the greatest friend of the UK as a union could possibly argue that Scotland's oil wealth has been used wisely for the future of the people of the United Kingdom since it was discovered in 1970.
Joanne Lamont, the argument being that Westminster squandered the oil then, why trust them not to squander it in the future?
Well, what I would say is that looking forward, what we're told is that there's a great range of options in terms of what would actually come out of the ground. I think it's a great asset. I think it's a great asset to the people of Scotland. I mean, I was very much affected by Syrian Wood's contribution because it felt to me like he didn't really want to come into this debate. But he said, for the interest of my children and my grandchildren, they need to know that from now until they're middle-aged, oil will no longer be something that contributes majorly to the economy. People need to understand that and the implications of that. They will know the figures better than I do. But last year, there was the amount of money raised in revenue in oil came in at £4 billion less than was estimated by the Scottish Government. We're talking about how we're going to fund our health service, our schools. How are we going to do that with a resource that is so volatile? Yes, there is volatility, but across the whole of the United Kingdom, you can manage that volatility. But John's spending plans are based on oil, and that is a volatile resource. And I am concerned that we get ourselves in a position, we're in a position where the most generous estimate come from the Scottish Government. They have to guarantee that in order to deal with the pressures on public services that they want to protect.
Let's put that to John Swinney. I mean, Joanne Lamont's right. There was a 41.5% drop in revenue from North Sea oil in the last financial year. If that happened in the first year of an independent Scotland, we'd really be in trouble, wouldn't we?
I think if we look at recent years, we can see that oil forecasts move in both directions. In 2011, Alistair Darling forecast there'd be £5 billion of revenues coming from oil and gas, and it turned out to be 11. So he was £6 billion adrift, and to the good of the public finances. So what you do, and what we set out, is that you need to have an oil stabilisation fund. So where you gain on the 1 year, you hold that to balance if you've got years where you don't deliver as many revenues.
Isn't the problem the first few years before you can set that up that you would really struggle to balance the books if there was a big drop like last year? My
point was about oil stabilisation fund, James, where you use gains that you make in any given year to cushion any under-realisation of resources that come in general. Now, if you look at the issue about the volume of resources, James, the 24 billion barrels of oil figure comes from Oil and Gas UK, the industry. It has been backed up by, amongst others...
It's up to 24 billion, 12 to 24 billion range.
But backed up by a range of experts like Professor Alec Kemp of the University of Aberdeen, or Professor Donald Mackay, who was an economic advisor to countless Labour and Conservative Secretaries of State in Scotland. And Ian Wood actually in 2012 gave an interview to your colleague Douglas Fraser, in which he said 24 billion barrels was what could be expected to come out of. Now, what's absolutely crystal clear is there's a significant opportunity for Scotland, and we should make sure we seize that opportunity and not see it squandered like it was the last time.
I'm just, you know, one of the things about this whole referendum, and why I'm really looking forward to the 19th, is that we'll not have to switch on the television and radio and have another expert, professor, somebody outstanding in their field, and none of them damn well seem to agree with each other, and it leaves the layperson in the middle even more confused. It was so much simpler in the 1970s. The SNP just said, it's Scotland's oil, and that was it. You either agreed or you didn't. Now we're arguing about how many barrels. Do you know something, folks? It doesn't actually matter how many barrels of oil there are, even if it stretches to infinity. You're going to turn this small country of ours into a petro-currency with an unknown future in terms of which mode of currency you're using, and that uncertainty underpinned by not paying your debts from day one. It's a recipe for disaster.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very sorry to tell you, folks, that our time is up. It has flown by. We're back next Wednesday when we'll be in Aberdeen. On our panel, the Deputy First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, Labour's former Scottish Secretary, Jim Murphy, the businessman, Brian Souter, and the former leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, Annabel Goldie. And then our final programme will be in Stirling on the 14th of September, the last Sunday before the vote. To apply to join the audience, you can search the web for BBC Referendum Debate. For now, though, thanks very much indeed to the panel. Thanks very much indeed to our audience. And from Leith Academy in Edinburgh, a very good night.